Welcome to Wisconsin in Focus. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square. I'm with Benjamin Yount, the Center Square's intrepid reporter. Here's the deal. It's a budget deal, a debt ceiling deal on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And it has a divided reaction from Wisconsin legislators, lawmakers. So fill us in. What's the basis of the deal? Because everybody was like biting their nails. It was headlines for weeks and weeks and weeks. And the immovable object against the unstoppable force, et cetera, et cetera. And well, they finally came to loggerheads. They made a deal, and not a whole lot of people are happy.
It has been said that if you have an agreement where both sides are slightly unhappy, then you got a good agreement. It's also been said that agreements where people don't win are bad agreements. This is an agreement where both sides are unhappy and nobody really is a clear winner. The broad strokes of it is that this is an agreement to stop the nation from defaulting on its debt. Never happened before. Nobody really knows exactly what would happen if it does, but the Treasury Secretary was saying all manners of, oh, this is horrible, and we've never done this, and nobody's going to know what happens if this happens, and June 1st is the deadline. No, June 6th is the deadline. But essentially, the Republicans who control the U.S. House of Representatives agreed with President Biden to raise the debt ceiling, to continue to spend more. The compromise comes from promises from the Biden administration to spend slightly less going forward and work in some welfare to work reforms that are very, 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 very important to Republican lawmakers. That being said, at the end of the day, this deal still spends more money than we would if we were going back to pre-coronavirus budgetary times. And the promises to spend less are limited. This, by the way, is a reflection of the fact that Republicans control one portion of the federal government. Sure, there's a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, but we'll set that aside from now. The Biden White House and the democratically controlled U.S. Senate didn't want to spend any less. They wanted to continue spending more and more and more and more and more. So it was the Republican-controlled House that really drove this deal. That being said, one of Wisconsin's Republican congressmen, Tom Tiffany, perhaps one of the more conservative congressmen here in Wisconsin, voted against this. He joined Gwen Moore, who is one of Wisconsin's most liberal, progressive, Democratic congresswomen, in voting against the debt ceiling deal. Now, they rarely ever vote the same way on almost anything, and they voted the same way on this for different reasons. But again, you're sitting here looking at a time where one of the most conservative members of the U.S. House in Wisconsin and one of the most progressive members of the U.S. House in Wisconsin voted on the same side, and that alone is newsworthy.
I would imagine so. In the story that you published on this, you quote Republican Congressman Derek Van Orden.
Derek Van Orden's from out west. He ended up voting for the debt ceiling deal. And the way he put it, I believe the quote that I used was a Twitter quote where he said, Republicans have voted to responsibly raise the debt ceiling. And he took special umbrage with the idea that Republicans were holding the nation hostage. Van Orden is a former Navy SEAL, and he likes to remind people that he's a former Navy SEAL. And so he said, as a former Navy SEAL who had hostage rescue as part of my training, we didn't hold anybody hostage. The idea of Republicans holding the people hostage comes from Gwen Moore, who said this after the vote. She said, I resent this extreme House Republican majority using their power to create a debt default crisis, holding the American people hostage and pushing our country to the brink of catastrophe unless their demands were met. That's the first sentence. I love this second sentence. I voted to raise the debt ceiling 3 times under the Trump administration because I know that Congress must pay its bill and meet its obligations. I have supported bipartisan deals to raise the debt ceiling in the past, but yet she did not support this one. She blames the Republicans for creating a crisis, says you're holding us hostage, then did nothing to end the crisis. Moore and Mark Pocan, the other Democratic congressman from Wisconsin, didn't like the welfare to work requirements that are included in this deal. Now, Tom Tiffany, again, the mirror image polar opposite of Gwen Moore, he said that House Republicans passed the Limit, Save, Grow Act. I always love it when they throw legislation into a statement to avoid default and chart a responsible fiscal future to our nation. But President Biden's latest debt ceiling gimmick will send the United States over a fiscal cliff, you can imagine, as he pounds the desk. The latest debt limit deal, Tiffany said, is a missed opportunity that adds $4 trillion to our national debt, keeps $1.2 trillion in unreliable green energy giveaways, and forces 87% of hardworking Americans without federal student loan debt to pay for those that do. So again, Gwen Moore votes against the debt ceiling deal, not because it raises the debt ceiling, because it doesn't spend enough and requires some work requirements for welfare recipients. Tom Tiffany doesn't vote for the debt ceiling deal because it doesn't cut enough, and it still includes some of President Biden's political agenda pieces. So these are the strange bedfellows. And once this goes to the Senate, which it does here soon, we'll see another reverse. Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin just released a statement here in the past 10 minutes saying that she supports this plan, while Republican U.S. Senator Ron Johnson says he's probably a no on this, again, because he doesn't think that it goes far enough. So the Republican-crafted debt ceiling deal in Washington, D.C. is likely going to pass with more Democrat votes than Republicans, likely in the Senate.
I like how you said strange bedfellows, because there seems to be a whole lot of demagoguery going on from either side. And when Moore says that out of $31 trillion in debt, they've decided the most important thing is a meager $6 million of food assistance for needy families, this was never about the debt, but enacting cruelty.
This is one of these things that, you know, when we write about these, share these on Twitter, almost all of the reaction to this is political, that there are very few people who have a budgetary grasp on this. And it is because in some parts, the federal budget is so large and the money is just sort of numbers out of a computer that, yes, there is a huge national debt and no, it's not going anywhere. But part of the problem is this crisis wasn't real. At the state level, if there's no state budget, certain things get shut down. At the local level, if there's no local budget, cops and firefighters and, road crews, that stuff, I've said for years that if you ever want to move something at a local school, cancel high school football right before the season starts. You'll have parents on the schoolhouse steps with torches and pitchforks. And it's really hard for most Americans to grasp the minutia of the federal budget. And so what you have is this fallback on, all right, well, I'm going to blast these people as big spenders and I'm going to blast those people as heartless budget cutters. And the back and forth goes, and it really just goes over the heads of most Americans. Ron Johnson got written up in the Journal Sentinel, the paper in Milwaukee, when he said this is a phony crisis. He said, this is a phony crisis. We're not going to default on the debt. It doesn't happen. And there's no reason to get all worked up about it. And the pearl clutching. And Johnson was proven right. We didn't default on the debt. We never have. There's always a deal at the last second.
Any parting shots on this one, Ben?
No, we'll watch the vote in the Senate, then we'll go on, and a couple of years from now, we'll be doing the exact same podcast on the exact same topic.
Listeners can keep up with all the stories mentioned before and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for The Center Square. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening.